There it was, my own son's signature on a document that would have put me in a nursing home and taken everything I owned. $6 million. 40 years of savings. All of it. Signed away to a daughter-in-law who smiled at me over Sunday dinner while plotting to declare me incompetent. Craig didn't know I had found it. He didn't know I had already called my lawyer. And he certainly didn't know what I was about to do next. But let me start from the beginning, from the morning everything changed. Thank you for being here. Before we continue, drop a quick comment below. Have you ever been surprised by someone you thought you knew completely? Yes or no is enough. I read every single one, and your voice matters here. Just a small note. Some details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling. What truly matters is the message it carries. The bank's words cut through the morning fog like a blade someone had been asking questions about my accounts. And that someone was my own son. I stood in my kitchen at Cannon Beach, 74 years old, with silver hair. I'd stopped dying decades ago. And eyes that had photographed 3 wars without flinching. The Oregon coast pressed gray and patient against my windows, while a polite voice from Pacific Coast Bank dismantled everything I thought I knew about my family. "Ma'am, we wanted to verify," the representative said, her tone carefully neutral. "Did you authorize your son to inquire about your account balances and beneficiary designations?" "No," the word came out steady. "I did not." She explained that a man identifying himself as Craig Hartwell had called twice last week, once asking about total assets, once about the process for establishing power of attorney. He'd been charming, she said, concerned about his elderly mother's financial security. I thanked her and hung up. The coffee in my hand had gone cold. I set it down on the counter my husband Lawrence built 30 years ago, back when this cottage was our escape from the noise of the world. He'd been dead for 15 years now. And I'd learned to fill the silence with work, with memory, with the careful maintenance of secrets. Craig, my son Craig, who called on holidays and sent flowers on my birthday, and visited twice a year with his wife Teresa, always asking if I needed help managing my finances, always so concerned. When does a mother stop making excuses for her son and start seeing him clearly? I spent 30 years photographing men who smiled while they planned betrayals. I covered the fall of Saigon, the siege of Sarajevo, the chaos of Somalia. I learned to read danger in the smallest details, the shift of a shadow, the pause before a lie, the particular quality of attention that meant someone was calculating rather than connecting. Craig had been calculating for a while now. I'd felt it in his questions about my health insurance, his casual mentions of how complicated finances become at my age, his wife's pointed comments about the burden of maintaining a coastal property alone. I'd ignored it because he was my son. The kitchen suddenly felt too exposed. I walked down the narrow hallway to the door I kept locked, the one room in this cottage that no family member had ever entered. My dark room. My sanctuary, the place where I kept the life none of them knew existed. The key turned smoothly. Inside, the smell of developer fluid and old paper wrapped around me like armor. Red Safelite gave the space its familiar crimson glow as I stepped past the enlarger, past the drawing lines, past shelves of carefully labeled negative binders. The walls told a story my children had never heard. Pulitzer-nominated photographs from Vietnam hung beside images from the Balkans. A bronze medal from the Overseas Press Club sat in a velvet case next to commendations from 3 different war correspondents. Associations. On the highest shelf, Lawrence's photograph watched over everything. Those steady engineer's eyes that always saw what mattered. Let me tell you something about war photographers. We learn to read danger before it announces itself. We develop instincts that outlast the conflicts themselves. And we learn, sometimes too late, that the most dangerous battles happen at home. My children think I'm a retired community college teacher who lives on Social Security and their father's modest pension. They have no idea that the negatives in this room are worth more than most houses. They don't know about the auction house in New York that contacts me every few years, offering increasingly absurd sums. They've never seen the bank statements that show what 40 years of careful investment and a legendary career actually built. $6 million. That's what I'm worth on paper. I built this room to preserve the past. Now I wondered if I'd built it to hide from my own family. The filing cabinet in the corner held the most valuable negatives the Vietnam collection, including one particular shot of a young Marine carrying his wounded friend through monsoon rain that 3 museums had tried to acquire. I moved toward it out of habit, the way I always checked on precious things when something felt wrong. The lock was intact, but the dust pattern along the top edge wasn't right. I ran my finger across the surface. Someone had touched this cabinet recently. Someone had stood exactly where I was standing and examined the lock, tested its strength, perhaps measured it for tools. Someone who wasn't me, 74 years old. And I was about to discover which of my children had inherited my instincts for survival and which had learned to hunt. I stepped back from the cabinet and looked at the room with new eyes, not as a sanctuary anymore, as a crime scene, as evidence of intrusion into a life I'd kept hidden precisely because I understood what money did to families. The cottage that had been my refuge for 30 years was no longer safe. Someone had been inside my most private space, touching my most valuable possessions, and the only people with keys were my 2 children. One of them was investigating my finances through the bank. The other I hadn't heard from in 3 weeks, and I was standing in a room full of secrets worth killing for. Finally understanding that the most dangerous war I'd ever covered was about to begin in my own family. I spent 2 days photographing every inch of that filing cabinet, the disturbed dust, the misaligned papers, the fingerprints that weren't mine. Evidence. Then I locked it all in my safe and drove to Lake Oswego with a question burning in my chest. My son, Craig Hartwell, lived in a house that cost more than most people earn in a decade. At 42, he had his father's strong jaw, but none of Lawrence's quiet humility. He worked in real estate development, which meant he bought things other people built and sold them for profit. The house reflected this 4,000 square feet of statement. Very little soul. Teresa answered the door before I could knock. My daughter-in-law was 39, with manicured nails and the kind of careful beauty that required constant maintenance. She smiled, as she always did, lips moving while her eyes calculated. "Mom, what a wonderful surprise." She kissed air near my cheek. "Craig didn't mention you were coming." I didn't tell him. Something flickered behind her expression. She recovered quickly. The living room was a magazine spread, white couches no one sat on, family photographs arranged by a decorator rather than memory. I'd been in war zones that felt more welcoming. Craig appeared from his home office, phone in hand. already talking before he registered my presence. "The permit should clear by—" He stopped. "Mom, hey." "Hello, Craig." Teresa glided toward a sideboard and produced a manila folder with practiced casualness. "Actually, this works out perfectly. We have some paperwork that needs your signature." "Paperwork." "Insurance updates," Craig said. He pocketed his phone and joined us, standing slightly behind his wife. The company sent new forms. Standard stuff, but they need signatures from all policyholders. I accepted the folder. Inside were 6 pages of dense legal text, the kind designed to make readers skim rather than study. Headers mentioned insurance, beneficiary designations, routine administrative updates. But I'd spent decades reading documents in multiple languages while shells fell outside my window. I knew how people buried important things. Page 4, paragraph 3. Smaller font than everything else. Durable power of attorney. Not insurance updates, not routine paperwork. This document would give Craig complete control over my assets, my medical decisions, my living arrangements. It would make him the legal voice of a woman declared incompetent. It would strip me of everything while I still breathed. "I'll need to read this at home," I said. My voice remained steady. "My eyes aren't what they used to be." Teresa's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Take your time." "There's no rush," Craig added. "Whenever you're ready." I looked at my son, really looked for the first time in years. I searched for the boy who used to bring me dandelions, who cried when Lawrence explained why I had to leave for another assignment. That boy was buried somewhere beneath the expensive haircut and the casual deception. But I couldn't find him. We made small talk for 20 minutes. I asked about their daughter Emma. This was away at college. I admired the new landscaping. I accepted tea I didn't drink. Then I drove home with the folder on my passenger seat. Evidence of something I'd refused to believe until now. My son was trying to steal my life. The cottage appeared through the fog exactly as I'd left it. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air held a different quality, disturbed, rearranged, and the smell, subtle but unmistakable. You want to know what betrayal smells like. It smells like your daughter-in-law's perfume, lingering in a room she claims she's never entered. I walked to the darkroom door, ajar. Not by much, just enough to tell me someone had been careless, or confident, or both. The lock showed no damage. They'd used a key. Only 3 people had keys to this cottage: me, Craig, and Lorraine. My daughter Lorraine lived in Astoria with her husband and would never enter without calling, which meant Craig had used his emergency key, the one I'd given him for disasters, for urgent situations, for the possibility that his elderly mother might fall and need help. Inside the darkroom, the filing cabinet stood open. My negatives had been examined and replaced in the wrong order, chronological instead of thematic. An amateur's mistake. They'd found nothing because they didn't know what to look for. The most valuable pieces weren't labeled. The auction estimates weren't filed with the photographs. My real records were in a safety deposit box in Portland. But they had tried. They had violated my space, my trust, my sanctuary. 3 wars taught me one thing when someone searches your home. They've already decided you're the enemy. I locked the darkroom door and sat in the red light among my war photographs. The walls held images of soldiers, refugees, mothers clutching children in the rubble of what used to be their lives. I had witnessed betrayal on 100 scales. Countries against citizens, brothers against brothers, trust weaponized into destruction. Now it was happening in my own family. I pulled out a legal pad and began to write, not a letter, not a plea for understanding, a battle plan. If my son wanted to play this game, he was about to discover something he'd apparently forgotten. His mother had survived enemies far more dangerous than him. I had documented atrocities and lived to tell the truth. I had carried wounded colleagues through hostile fire. I had looked warlords in the eye and refused to blink. Craig thought he was hunting a frail old woman. He was about to learn he had declared war on someone who knew exactly how to fight back. The battle plan sat half-written on my legal pad, but my pen had stopped moving before I could fight for the future. I had to remember how we got here and the weight of everything I had given a son who now wanted to take even more. Lawrence Hartwell had been gone 3 years now, but his photograph still watched over my darkroom. Those steady engineer's eyes that had seen exactly what mattered for 52 years of marriage. He'd been the calm center of our family, the one who believed in second chances and the fundamental goodness of our children. He'd also been wrong. I remember the summer of 2001, Craig standing in our kitchen with acceptance letters spread across the table. University of Oregon's journalism program. His eyes had blazed with certainty as he laid out his vision: investigative reporting, truth-telling, a career that mattered. "This is my shot, Mom," he'd said. "I'll make you proud." The tuition cost $180,000 over 4 years. We wrote the checks without hesitation. Money from my photography career, from assignments that had taken me away from my children's school plays and birthday parties. I told myself it was worth it. I was investing in his future. How many parents have sat where I sat, watching their savings become someone else's future, while their own grew smaller? Craig graduated with honors. He worked for a newspaper for exactly 18 months before deciding journalism was dying and real estate was the future. He came to us again, older now, with spreadsheets instead of acceptance letters. "The market is exploding," he explained. "I need startup capital. $150,000 for licensing, training, initial inventory. This is my calling. Mom, I can feel it." We believed him. Lawrence and I believed every word because that's what parents do. We remember the child who brought us dandelions, not the adult who brings us investment proposals. We signed the checks. The journalism degree gathered dust. The real estate career produced a Lake Oswego mansion, but somehow never repaid a cent of what we'd given. Every Christmas brought expensive gifts instead of gratitude, objects instead of reciprocity. The checks we wrote could have bought us 3 retirements. Instead, they bought Craig's ambition and Teresa's designer wardrobe. $330,000. That was the price of my son's dreams. Paid in currency that went only one direction. Lorraine, my daughter, never asked for anything beyond the modest wedding we hosted in the backyard. She thanked us for every birthday card, every holiday visit, every small gesture. She married Keith Mercer, a high school teacher in Astoria, and they lived within their means with their daughter Juniper. Lorraine called weekly, just to talk, not to ask, not to need, just to connect. 2 children, same parents, completely different souls. The memory I'd been avoiding finally surfaced, September 2022. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and endings. Lawrence's hand in mine felt lighter than it ever had in 52 years. Just in case. Connie, he'd whispered 3 days before the end. His voice was paper-thin, but his eyes held that familiar clarity. I want to make sure you're taken care of. I thought he meant emotionally. I thought he was talking about the grief to come. He died on a Tuesday morning, peacefully, his hand still wrapped in mine. I photographed nothing that day. Some moments are too sacred for frames. 3 weeks later, the insurance documents arrived. I'd expected the standard policy $500,000, enough to supplement my own savings and the photography income. Lawrence had always been practical, a structural engineer who calculated everything twice. But the number on the page stopped my breath. $3.5 million. I called the insurance company, certain there had been an error. The representative confirmed everything Lawrence had quietly tripled the policy 8 years ago, paying the increased premiums from his personal account. He'd never mentioned it, never asked for input, never explained. 52 years of marriage, and he kept this one secret to protect me. Let me tell you what real love looks like. It looks like a man who plans for your protection, even from his deathbed, even from threats he hoped would never come. It looks like silence kept, not for deception, but for defense. Lawrence had watched Craig's entitlement grow for years. He'd seen the one-way traffic of our generosity. He'd calculated, as engineers do, the probability that our son might one day see his mother not as family, but as resource. And he'd built me a fortress without ever saying a word. I put down the old insurance documents and looked at Lawrence's photograph on the shelf. He had seen what I couldn't or wouldn't. He had loved Craig as fiercely as I did, but he had loved me more than pride, more than the comfortable lie that our children would never hurt us. Now, 3 years later, I finally understood. Lawrence's insurance, combined with my photography collection, made me worth nearly $6 million. He'd known, somehow, that the day would come when I'd need every penny of that protection. What he couldn't have predicted was who else would discover my secret. Because unbeknownst to me, across the state in Portland, a curator was about to recognize my name on a half-forgotten exhibition catalog, and everything would change. The curator's call came a week after the break-in. The Portland Art Museum needed my approval on some placard text for an upcoming retrospective. I drove the 2 hours not just for the paperwork, but to escape the cottage that no longer felt like mine. I was reviewing the exhibition layout when I heard footsteps stop abruptly behind me. A sharp intake of breath. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 12 years. Mrs. Hartwell. Elara Galloway stood frozen before the largest print in the collection, my 1974 Saigon photograph, the one that had been nominated for every major award that year. She was 32 now, a working photojournalist with ink-stained fingers and the kind of focused intensity I remembered from my community college classroom. She'd been my best student, the one who understood that photography was about patience, not equipment. Now she was staring at my name on a museum placard, her face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and something that looked almost like betrayal. This is you, her voice cracked. The Saigon photograph. You took this. That was another life, Elara, one I kept separate from teaching. Separate, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. You taught us composition, using examples from magazines. All that time, your own work was hanging in museums. Why didn't you tell us? Standing in that gallery was like watching two negatives overlap, the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become, finally developing into a single image for 30 years. I kept my career compartmentalized. The legendary war photographer existed in archives and auction houses. The community college teacher existed in Oregon classrooms. The two never met because I'd built walls between them. Fame complicates teaching, I said finally. I wanted students to learn technique, not worship credentials. Elara walked slowly along the exhibition wall, studying each photograph with new eyes. Her hand hovered inches from the Vietnam series, close enough to feel the paper, but disciplined enough not to touch. "Do you have any idea what this collection is worth?" she asked quietly. "These prints alone, just the ones in this room, could be worth millions." "I'm aware. And nobody knows. Your family doesn't know." I thought of Craig, his fingers on my filing cabinet, his voice on the phone to my bank. Some of them are beginning to suspect. Elara turned to face me, and I saw the journalist behind her photographer's eyes. She was assembling pieces, building a story. "Is that why you're here? Something's happening." I told her more than I intended. The bank call, the POA documents. The break-in I could feel, but hadn't been able to prove until I saw the perfume and the misaligned negatives. Elara listened without interrupting, her expression hardening with each revelation. "You need documentation," she said when I finished. "Everything they've done, everything they're planning. If this goes legal, you'll want a paper trail." "I've started one." "Good." She pulled out her phone and typed something quickly. "And you need people who know your real value, not just the money, your legacy. If they're trying to claim you're incompetent, having the art world vouch for you doesn't hurt." I looked at this woman I'd taught to frame a shot and wondered when she'd learned to frame a defense. An unexpected ally, found in the last place I'd thought to look, while I was discovering an ally I didn't know I needed. 60 miles away, my daughter-in-law was sharpening a knife I couldn't yet see. Teresa sat in her Lake Oswego kitchen that same afternoon, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in the hushed tones of someone arranging something they shouldn't. "I need a quiet appraisal," she told the real estate agent on the other end. "The Cannon Beach property. The owner is elderly and—" She paused, selecting her words carefully. "Easily confused. We're handling her affairs now." The agent asked something about authorization. "The paperwork is being processed. Power of attorney should clear within the month." Teresa's voice was smooth, practiced. "Once it goes through, we'll list immediately. The market's strong for coastal properties right now." She instructed him to send all correspondence to her personal email, not the household account. Her husband didn't need to see the details yet, not until everything was in place. Craig had the stomach for financial maneuvering, but Teresa knew he might hesitate at the speed of what she had planned. She wasn't just planning to take my money. She was planning to erase my home before I even knew it was gone. Teresa hung up and marked the appraisal appointment in her private calendar. 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, she'd have control of everything: the cottage, the accounts, the old woman's entire life. She could already envision the listing photographs, the open houses, the bidding war for oceanfront property. What she didn't know was that 60 miles away, someone had just learned exactly how much that old woman was really worth. Someone who understood the difference between market value and legacy value. Someone who was already composing emails to gallery directors and museum boards, building a wall of credibility that no competency claim could breach. Teresa saw a confused elderly woman with a cottage to sell. Alara had just discovered a living legend worth protecting. The race had begun, and only one of them knew they were running. Alara had given me a list of contacts: gallery directors, museum curators, journalists who remembered my work. But before I could use any of them, I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting against. 2 days after the museum encounter, I sat across from Glenn Whitaker with the POA documents spread between us like evidence at a crime scene. Glenn was 58, an estate attorney whose Portland office still smelled of old law books and leather chairs. I'd known him for 20 years, ever since he helped Lawrence and me set up our trusts. He examined the papers over his reading glasses, his expression growing darker with each page. This isn't a standard healthcare directive. Constance. He set the documents down carefully. This is a durable power of attorney with extremely broad language. Total control. Explain it to me. All of it. If you sign this, your son would have immediate authority over all your financial assets. Every bank account, every investment, every piece of property. Glenn paused, choosing his next words with legal precision. He could sell your house tomorrow, and you'd have no legal recourse. The cottage, my sanctuary, gone with a signature I'd thought was routine paperwork. There's more, Glenn continued. This document also grants medical decision-making power. Where you live, what treatment you receive, whether you're placed in a facility. He looked at me over his glasses. Constance, whoever drafted this document wasn't thinking about your protection. They were thinking about theirs. How do you explain to a lawyer that your own son is trying to steal your life, not just your money? The signature line, I said. There's a notary requirement. 2 witnesses. Yes, and they'd need a physician's statement if they wanted to invoke any incapacity clauses. Glenn leaned back. But here's what concerns me. The language is so broad that once you sign, proving coercion becomes nearly impossible. This was drafted by someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Teresa, it had to be. Craig didn't have the patience for legal details, but his wife had the kind of calculating mind that drafted escape clauses and loopholes. What can I do? Don't sign anything. Not a single document from your son or his wife, no matter how routine it looks. Glenn pulled out a legal pad. We need to get ahead of this. Updated will, explicit instructions, maybe a living trust that puts your assets beyond their reach. I left his office with a folder of forms and a consultation scheduled for next week. The legal machinery was starting to move, but it felt slow against the urgency building in my chest. The next afternoon, I drove to Astoria to visit Lorraine. My daughter's house was warm and cluttered, full of school projects and family photographs, and the kind of comfortable chaos that comes from actually living in a space. So different from Craig's sterile showroom. I found Juniper in the garage, my 11-year-old granddaughter kneeling beside a stack of boxes I'd stored there years ago. She had her mother's kind eyes and the kind of curiosity that asked questions before calculating consequences. In her hands was a dusty film canister. The label was faded but still legible. Press Vietnam, 1974. Grandma, what's this? She held it up, turning it in the light. It says press, and there's a stamp with a helicopter on it. Juniper's fingers traced the faded military stamps, the same way mine had traced them 40 years ago. Half a world away. I'd shipped these boxes to Lorraine's garage after Lawrence died, thinking they'd be safer away from the cottage, thinking no one would ever look. That's from a long time ago. Junie, before your mother was born. Were you a reporter in a war? Her eyes widened with that particular mix of excitement and concern that only children possess. Can I see what's inside? I knelt beside her, my knees protesting the concrete floor. The box held film canisters, old notebooks, a press credential with my photograph from another era. Beneath it all, wrapped in cloth, was my old camera, the Leica M4 that had documented Saigon's fall. Sometimes the most dangerous questions come from the most innocent mouths. I was a photographer, I said carefully. I took pictures of things that were happening in the world, important things. Like what? Like soldiers, and families who had to leave their homes, and people who were very brave in very hard times. Juniper was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the seriousness children reserve for adult revelations. Then she looked up at me with her mother's eyes, Lorraine's eyes, my eyes, and asked the question I'd been avoiding for 50 years. Grandma, were you in a war? Did you see people die? I realized then that my secrets were unraveling from both ends. My son wanted my money. My granddaughter wanted my truth. Craig was dismantling my present, while Juniper excavated my past. Both threads led to the same hidden room, the life I'd kept locked away for so long that I'd almost convinced myself it belonged to someone else. Lorraine's voice drifted from the house, calling us in for dinner. Let's put these away for now, I said, gently taking the canister from Juniper's hands. Some stories take a long time to tell. But as I closed the box, I knew the time for hiding was ending. One of them would have to wait, and I knew which threat demanded attention first. I tucked Juniper's questions away in the same mental compartment where I kept my war memories, to be examined later, when the immediate threat was contained, 2 days after finding her in the garage. I drove back to Lake Oswego for a dinner invitation I couldn't refuse, and a signature I had no intention of giving. The table was set like a magazine photograph. Crystal glasses, fresh flowers, linen napkins folded into birds. Teresa had ordered from the expensive caterer, the one she used when impressing clients. I was being handled. "Mom, so glad you could make it." Craig kissed my cheek with practiced warmth. "We've been worried about you, all alone in that cottage." "I've been alone in worse places, dear." Dinner unfolded in careful choreography. Teresa asked about my health. Craig mentioned a friend whose mother had struggled with financial management in her 70s. They were building a case, brick by brick, constructing an image of a confused elderly woman who needed protection. I played along. I asked questions twice. I pretended to forget the name of my bank. I watched their exchange glances, nervous, calculating, and filed every detail. Their dining room was a stage set, fresh flowers, cloth napkins, and 2 predators pretending to be hosts. Over dessert, the script reached its crescendo. "Mom, about those documents." Craig's voice shifted into his sincere register, the one he used when closing deals. "The insurance forms we discussed. Have you had a chance to look them over?" "I have." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "And I have some concerns about the medical provisions." Teresa's smile flickered. Concerns. At my age, Craig, I don't sign anything involving medical decisions without my own doctor's review. I looked at my son with the steady gaze that had once faced down border guards and warlords. You understand. These things require due diligence. Silence. Craig's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. His voice was smooth, but I heard the strain beneath it. We just want to make sure you're protected. I appreciate that. My attorney is reviewing everything as well. Glenn Whitaker, you remember him? He handled your father's estate. Another exchanged glance. This one sharper. An attorney seems like overkill for routine paperwork, Teresa said lightly. At my age, dear, nothing is routine. I left shortly after, pleading fatigue. Craig walked me to my car with the attentiveness of a man who wanted something. His hand lingered on my door as I buckled in. Mom, you know we only want what's best for you. I know what you want. Craig. His expression froze for just a moment before the mask returned. Drive safe. I've photographed men planning ambushes with more subtlety than my son showed that night. What I didn't know, couldn't know, was what happened after my taillights disappeared down the driveway. But I would learn later, through channels I was still assembling, exactly how quickly the masks came off. Teresa stood in the foyer, arms crossed, fury radiating from her like heat from pavement. Craig was already reaching for the whiskey. She's stalling, Teresa said. Your mother isn't confused. She's playing us. She mentioned an attorney, Glenn Whitaker. He's sharp. I don't care how sharp he is. Teresa's voice dropped to a hiss. We have 47 days, Craig. 47 days before the loan comes due. If she doesn't sign, we lose everything. The house, the business, everything. Craig poured 2 fingers of bourbon and drank half without tasting it. She doesn't know about the loan. She doesn't need to know about the loan. She just needs to sign the papers so we can access her accounts. Teresa moved closer, her voice softening into something more dangerous. Your mother has been sitting on a gold mine, pretending to be poor. The cottage alone is worth $500,000. Her photography collection, who knows? She's been hiding money from this family for years. She's my mother. She's an obstacle. Teresa straightened. And we're out of time for gentle persuasion. Then what do you suggest? We stop asking nicely. 47 days. That's how long I had before my son's desperation turned into something worse. I drove through the dark Oregon night, my mind cataloging everything I'd observed, the nervous glances, the rehearsed questions, the too quick acceptance of my stalling tactics. They were afraid of something with a deadline. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from an unknown number. I pulled over to read it, my headlights cutting through the coastal fog. Mrs. Hartwell, this is the appraiser. Your daughter-in-law scheduled me for next Tuesday at your Cannon Beach property. She said you'd be expecting me. Should I confirm? I read the message 3 times. Teresa had scheduled an appraisal of my home without telling me, without asking, as if she already owned it. But someone had warned me. Someone on the inside had leaked the appointment to my phone instead of simply showing up with a clipboard. Someone wanted me to know what was coming. I typed a reply. Do not confirm. I'll be in touch. Then I sat in my car on the side of the road and smiled for the first time in days. My enemies had made 2 mistakes. They'd underestimated me, and they'd trusted someone they shouldn't have. The question now was, who had sent that warning, and what they wanted in return. The mystery of the appraiser text would have to wait. I had a more immediate question. How desperate was my son really? 2 days after the warning arrived on my phone, I drove to Craig's Pearl District office unannounced, not to confront, but to observe. His company occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated warehouse, the kind of building that signaled ambition and success. But as I pulled into the parking garage, I noticed something wrong. Half the executive spaces were empty. The building felt hollow, like a body evacuated of its organs. I was heading for the elevator when I heard his voice. Craig stood in the stairwell, phone pressed to his ear, pacing in tight circles. The concrete walls amplified every word, and he was too consumed by panic to notice his mother standing 20 feet away, frozen behind a pillar. "Please, Marcus, I'm asking for 60 days. His voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since he was 12 years old, crying over a broken bicycle. 60 days, and I can turn this around. A pause. Whatever Marcus said made Craig's shoulders slump. The Hawthorne development fell through. My investors pulled out last month. I just need time to restructure, to find new capital. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of desperation I recognized from his father. $2 million. You know I'm good for it. You've known me for 15 years. 2 million. The number hung in the stairwell like smoke. If this loan gets called, I lose everything. The company, the house, everything. Craig's voice dropped to something close to a whisper. My wife doesn't even know how bad it is. Nobody knows. I pressed my back against the concrete pillar, heart pounding. This wasn't the confident real estate developer who'd tried to slide a power of attorney across a dinner table. This was a man drowning, grabbing at anything that might float. How do you mourn a child who's still alive but has become someone you no longer recognize? Craig ended the call and stood in the stairwell for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then he straightened his tie, composed his face into something resembling competence, and walked up the stairs to his failing company. I retreated to my car without being seen. The parking garage smelled of oil and exhaust. I sat behind the wheel with the engine off, processing what I'd heard. Craig wasn't simply greedy. He wasn't scheming from a position of strength. He was drowning, and he'd decided his mother's hidden wealth was the life raft that would save him. The mathematics were brutal. He'd borrowed $2 million against future success, and that future had collapsed. His investors had fled. His development had failed. His wife apparently didn't know the full extent, though I suspected Teresa knew more than Craig realized. She always did. I had photographed desperate men in war zones, soldiers, refugees, prisoners. I knew desperation when I saw it. My son was all three fighting a losing battle, fleeing from consequences, trapped by his own choices. This didn't excuse him. Nothing could excuse trying to steal your mother's autonomy, her home, her life savings. But it explained him. My son wasn't a monster. He was a coward. And cowards are more dangerous because they have nothing left to lose. I thought about the money I'd given him over the years. The journalism degree he'd abandoned. The startup capital I'd invested in his real estate dreams. Every check had been a vote of confidence. A parent's belief that their child would eventually find their footing. Instead, he'd built a house of cards and now expected me to prop it up with my entire fortune. I had given him $150,000 to start this company. Now he needed everything I had just to keep it alive for another month. And if I refused, if I protected myself instead of rescuing him, he would lose it all anyway. The house, the business, the marriage, probably. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lawrence had secretly tripled our life insurance because he'd sensed this day might come. He'd built me a fortress, and now our son was trying to breach its walls. For the first time, I understood the full shape of what I was facing. This wasn't about Craig inheriting my money after I died. This was about stealing it while I still lived, before I could spend it, donate it, or put it beyond his reach. He needed my wealth now, not eventually, which meant he would escalate. The dinner table charm would give way to pressure. The pressure would give way to threats. And if threats failed, well, I'd seen what desperate men did in war zones. I started the car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Craig had maybe 45 days before his world collapsed. 45 days of increasing panic. 45 days to convince or coerce his mother into signing away her life. I couldn't save him. He'd made choices that led here, and those choices had consequences I couldn't undo with a signature. But I could protect myself. I could document everything, build an evidence file, prepare legal defenses. I could fight the way I'd always fought, with patience, precision, and the knowledge that truth, properly documented, was the most powerful weapon in any war. The photographer in me knew exactly what to do. It was time to start building a case. The time for observation was over. Craig had 45 days before his world collapsed, which meant I had even less before his desperation turned into action. The next morning, I cleared my darkroom table and laid out every document my son and daughter-in-law had ever asked me to sign. 4 decades of investigative journalism don't disappear just because you stop carrying a press credential. The skills I'd used to expose corruption in war zones, to document atrocities for international tribunals, to build cases that put generals behind bars. Those skills had been waiting dormant for exactly this kind of fight. I pinned papers to the corkboard above my enlarger. Bank statements on the left, correspondence in the middle, the POA documents on the right. Red string connected dates and signatures. A timeline emerged in black marker along the bottom edge. In Saigon, I'd learned to spot a forged document from across a room. The pressure of the pen tells you everything, whether the hand moved with confidence or hesitation, whether the signature flowed naturally or was traced with careful deliberation. Now I turned those same skills on my own family. The bank inquiry came August 30th. The POA was presented September 4th. My darkroom had been searched sometime between those dates. 3 weeks of coordinated activity, all while Craig smiled at Sunday dinners and asked about my health. The red safe light in my darkroom had witnessed 1,000 revelations, but never one as personal as this. I pulled out my magnifying loupe, the one I'd used to examine contact sheets from combat zones, and started with the oldest documents. Christmas cards, birthday acknowledgments, routine paperwork from a decade of family interactions. My own signatures stared back at me, consistent across the years, the same slant, the same pressure, the same distinctive loop on the capital C. Then I reached the bank paperwork. A form dated August 28th sat at the bottom of the pile. Authorization for account information disclosure. I didn't remember signing it. I didn't remember ever seeing it. Under the loop, The signature read Constance Hartwell in familiar blue ink. But something was wrong. The C looped left, mine loops right. I've signed my name the same way for 60 years, since my first press credential in 1968. The muscle memory is automatic, unchangeable. This signature was close enough to fool a bank clerk or a casual observer. But under magnification, the differences screamed. Let me tell you something about forgery. Amateurs copy the shape of letters, but they can't copy the muscle memory of decades. They study the visual pattern without understanding the physical act. They get the curves right, but the pressure wrong, the slant correct, but the rhythm off. This forger had been careful. They'd practiced. But they'd made the fundamental mistake of thinking signatures are about appearance rather than motion. I compared the August 28th document against my genuine signatures from the same month. The differences multiplied under scrutiny. The crossbar on the T sat too high. The final L trailed downward instead of upward. The ink density varied in all the wrong places. This wasn't sloppiness. This was a deliberate forgery, dated 4 days before the bank had called to warn me about suspicious inquiries. My son hadn't just planned to steal from me. He already had. August 28th. He'd been in my accounts for 3 weeks before I ever suspected a thing. I sat back in my chair, the forged document in my hands. The rage I expected didn't come. Or rather, it came and transformed immediately into something colder, more useful. Evidence. I was holding evidence of a crime. Not suspicion, not intuition, not a mother's wounded feelings. Hard, documentable proof that Craig had committed fraud. The war photographer in me took over completely. I set up my camera on a tripod and photographed the forged document under every light angle, harsh, direct light to show the ink. Impression. Raking light to reveal the pressure variations. Ultraviolet to check for erased guide marks underneath. I shot comparison frames of my genuine signatures, documenting the differences with clinical precision. Then I pulled out more documents. A change of address notification I'd never submitted. An investment inquiry form with my apparent authorization. Each one bore the same careful forgery, the same telltale errors. How many files existed that I hadn't seen? How many institutions had received paperwork bearing a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't? I photographed everything, labeled the files with dates and document types, and created a master index on my laptop. The same methodology I'd used to organize evidence from refugee camps and mass graves now cataloged my son's crimes against his own mother. My phone sat on the table, waiting. Glenn Whitaker needed to see this. The attorney could tell me what legal options this evidence unlocked, what charges could be filed, what protections could be put in place. I reached for the phone. It rang before my fingers touched the screen. Teresa's name glowed on the display. My daughter-in-law, who had probably practiced that forged signature, who had likely scheduled that secret appraisal, who was calling for reasons I could already guess. I let it ring 3 times while I steadied my breathing. Then I answered. My voice as calm as it had ever been in a war zone. Hello, Teresa. I was just thinking about you. Teresa's voice came through the phone like silk wrapped around a razor blade. I held the forged documents in my other hand. Evidence of her crimes. while she delivered a performance of maternal concern that would have impressed any actress. "Mom, I'm so glad I caught you. Craig and I have been worried." "Have you?" I kept my voice neutral, pleasant even. "How thoughtful. We just think about you out there alone in that remote cottage at your age. Things can change so quickly." She paused, letting the implications settle. "A fall, a medical emergency, no one there to help. I've managed quite well so far." "Of course you have." Her tone shifted slightly, becoming more intimate, more concerned. "But Craig mentioned you seemed a little confused at dinner last week, forgetting things, repeating yourself." The lie was so smooth, I almost admired it. I hadn't repeated myself once at that dinner. I'd been sharper than anyone at the table, playing a careful game while they thought they were manipulating a doddering old woman. "Have you been feeling confused lately? Mom forgetful?" Teresa's voice dropped to a sympathetic murmur. "It's nothing to be ashamed of. These things happen at your age. That's why family needs to be involved in important decisions. I've interviewed warlords with more subtlety than my daughter-in-law showed in that phone call. She was laying groundwork, building a narrative. If the power of attorney failed, they would pivot to a competency challenge. They would claim I couldn't manage my own affairs. They would find a doctor willing to sign whatever they needed, and then they would take everything anyway, the legal route, if fraud didn't work. That's very kind of you to worry. Teresa." I set the forged documents down on my darkroom table, freeing my hand to grip the phone more tightly. "But I assure you, I've never felt sharper. We just want what's best for you. I'm sure you do." Silence stretched between us. She was waiting for something, an opening, an admission, any sign of the weakness she was trying to manufacture. Her voice was honey over broken glass sweet, until you tasted the edges. "The cottage must be lonely," she tried again. "Craig and I were discussing how nice it would be if you were closer to family. Maybe a retirement community, somewhere with staff, activities, other people your age." "You mean somewhere with monitoring and supervised finances?" "I mean somewhere safe. Mom." I let the silence stretch longer this time. Let her wonder if she'd pushed too hard. Let her anxiety build while I decided how much to reveal. "Actually, Teresa, I've been quite clear-headed lately." I picked up the forged bank authorization and studied it while I spoke. Sharp as I've ever been, noticing details I might have missed before. "That's wonderful to hear. In fact, I've been thinking about this cottage a lot, wondering what it might be worth." I paused, timing the next words carefully. "Have you had any thoughts about that?" The silence on her end was different now, colder, alert. "Why would I have thoughts about your cottage's value?" "Oh, I don't know." I let my voice drift into the casual tone of an old woman making conversation. "I just thought someone mentioned something about an appraisal. Next Tuesday, was it?" 3 seconds of silence. That's all it took to confirm she'd been the one to call the appraiser. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." I smiled into the phone, knowing she couldn't see it, but hoping she could hear it. "My mistake. I must be confused. You know how it is at my age." Teresa's breathing had changed. Faster, shallower. The composed manipulator was calculating at high speed, trying to figure out how much I knew and who had told me. "Mom, I think there's been some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding. Teresa." I let the pleasantness drain from my voice. Just for a moment. just long enough to let her glimpse what lay beneath. I understand everything perfectly. She stammered something about calling back later, about family discussions, about wanting the best for everyone. Then she hung up with the abruptness of someone who had lost control of a conversation they'd expected to dominate. I stared at the phone in my hand, heart pounding with something I hadn't felt since my last war zone, the thrill of a fight I intended to win. Teresa would report back to Craig. They would know now that their elderly target wasn't as helpless as they'd assumed. They would escalate, that was certain. But they would also make mistakes. Desperate people always did. I looked at the forged documents spread across my darkroom table. Hard evidence of fraud. A paper trail of betrayal. Everything I needed to destroy their scheme, if I chose to. But I wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. Tomorrow, I would visit Alara at the museum and confirm exactly how much my collection was worth. The bigger the target on my back, the more ammunition I needed. Then I would take the forgery evidence to Glenn and understand my legal options. The museum would give me numbers, the lawyer would give me strategy, and my daughter-in-law's rattled silence had given me something equally valuable, confirmation that I was no longer prey. I was the one doing the hunting now. The day after rattling Teresa, I drove to Portland to understand exactly what I was worth. Alara met me at the Tribune office with a folder thick enough to change everything. She'd been busy. Auction house catalogs, price comparisons, collector inquiries, all compiled with the same meticulous attention to detail she'd once applied to my classroom assignments. She spread the papers across her desk like evidence in a trial. Christie's estimates the Saigon 74 print at $1.8 million. Alara tapped the appraisal sheet. That's conservative. The last comparable print sold for 2.1. I stared at the number. I'd known my work had value, but seeing it quantified still felt unreal. The full Vietnam collection could exceed 2 million, she continued. Your Sarajevo series adds another 400,000. The humanitarian work from the 80s, another 300 at minimum. She looked up at me. You're not just wealthy, Mrs. Hartwell. You're sitting on a legacy that museums will fight over. $2 million. Enough to save Craig's company twice over. If only he'd asked instead of schemed. Now I understood why they'd searched my darkroom. They'd found hints of treasure, the press credentials, the awards, the carefully filed negatives. They just couldn't identify the gold. Craig knew I had something valuable. He just didn't know how valuable, or how to monetize it without my cooperation. But Teresa would figure it out eventually. She always did her research. What do you want to do with this information? Alara asked. For now, nothing public. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, but I need documentation that my collection exists and has verified value. If anyone tries to claim I'm incompetent, I want proof that I've been managing a small fortune without their help. Alara nodded slowly, understanding. You're building a defense file. I'm building whatever I need to survive my own son. That evening, I drove to Astoria. My daughter, Lorraine Mercer, answered the door, still wearing her hospital scrubs from the morning shift. But her warm smile made me feel like I'd finally come home. At 38, she had become the kind of woman I'd always hoped she'd be. Kind without being naive. Strong without being hard. Mom, you didn't have to drive all this way. I wanted to see Juniper. I stepped inside, inhaling the familiar scents of her home lavender candles, the remnants of dinner, the particular warmth of a house full of life. Is she still up? Juniper appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, eyes bright with the kind of energy that should have been spent hours ago. "Grandma, can you tell me more stories about the war boxes?" Lorraine gave me a questioning look. I hadn't told her about Juniper finding the Vietnam materials. Another secret to add to the pile. We settled in the living room, Juniper cross-legged on the floor, while I chose my words carefully. Some stories were too heavy for an 11-year-old. Others were just right. Juniper's eyes reflected the same wonder I'd seen in young soldiers hearing war stories for the first time. Awe mixed with the faint recognition that grown-ups had once been brave. "You really flew in helicopters? Grandma, into battles!" I flew wherever the story was. Uni. My job was to show people what they couldn't look away from. "Were you scared?" "Every single time." I smiled at her. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the important thing anyway. She asked about the cameras, about the soldiers, about what I ate and where I slept. I told her about monsoon rains and midnight deadlines, and the camaraderie of people who shared dangerous work. I edited out the bodies, the screaming, the nightmares that still found me sometimes. Those stories could wait until she was older, if they ever needed to be told at all. Lorraine listened from the kitchen doorway, coffee cup forgotten in her hands. When Juniper finally ran out of questions and was sent to bed, my daughter sat down across from me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us any of this?" How had I raised two children with the same stories, the same values, the same home, and watched them become such different people? "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I thought the past belonged in the past. Maybe I wanted you to know me as Mom, not as some legend in a museum." "You're still Mom." Lorraine reached for my hand. "Just Mom, with more chapters than I knew about." She walked me to the car after the house grew quiet. The Oregon night wrapped around us, cool and damp, smelling of rain that hadn't fallen yet. "Mom," she said quietly, "Craig called me today. He asked if I thought you were declining." I stopped walking. "I told him you were sharper than both of us combined." Lorraine's jaw tightened in a way that reminded me of Lawrence. "But Mom, they're planning something. I can feel it. The questions he was asking weren't about concern. They were about evidence." I pulled my daughter into a hug, holding her the way I had when she was small and the world seemed too large. "I know, sweetheart. I've been building a case of my own. You'll tell me if you need help." "You're already helping." I squeezed her hand. "Just by being exactly who you are." The drive home felt different, lighter. I had allies now. A journalist who knew my worth, a daughter who had my back, a lawyer preparing my defense. The time for investigation was ending. The time for action had arrived. Lorraine's warning about Craig gathering evidence convinced me I couldn't wait any longer. 3 days later, I sat in Glenn Whitaker's office with a pen in my hand and everything I'd built on the line. The documents lay spread across Glenn's desk, thick packets of legal language that translated into something simple: protection. Everything I owned, from the photography collection to the insurance proceeds to my modest savings, would transfer into a trust that only I controlled. "Once you sign this, Constance, your son cannot touch these assets without your explicit consent." Glenn slid the first signature page toward me. "Even if he somehow obtains power of attorney in the future, these funds are protected, irrevocable." Explain that to me again. Irrevocable? It means the terms cannot be changed once established. The division is locked, 70% to Lorraine, 30% to Craig. Glenn tapped the relevant paragraph. You can still access everything during your lifetime. You can spend it, donate it, invest it, but Craig cannot force a redistribution, cannot challenge the percentages, cannot claim the assets were divided unfairly. 70% to the daughter who called to ask how I was feeling. 30% to the son who had forged my signature and searched my darkroom. The trust document was a fortress built of paper and ink, and I was about to lock my son outside the walls. I signed the first page, then the second, then the third. The pen felt lighter than I expected. Signing away my son's expectations should have been heavier, but each signature felt less like punishment and more like self-defense. I wasn't attacking Craig. I was building walls he couldn't breach. The beneficiary designations update automatically. Glenn continued, your bank accounts, your investment portfolio, the insurance policies, everything flows into the trust upon your signature. And if they try to claim I was incompetent when I signed, Glenn smiled. I've been your attorney for 20 years. I'll testify to your mental acuity. Additionally, we're having this session recorded. He gestured to the small camera on his bookshelf. Time-stamped video of you asking detailed questions, understanding the implications, making informed decisions. No competency challenge survives that kind of documentation. I signed the final page and set down the pen. It was done. Now, Glenn said, his tone shifting, let's talk about offense. He pulled out the folder I'd brought 3 days ago, the forged bank authorizations, photographed under every light angle, accompanied by comparison samples of my genuine signature. He handled the documents with the care of a man who understood their explosive potential. This forgery changes everything. Glenn spread the photographs across his desk. If your son ever challenges the trust, if he or his wife ever attempt a competency hearing, we have grounds for criminal referral. Fraud, forgery, potentially elder abuse, depending on how a prosecutor interprets the pattern. Let me be clear. I didn't want revenge. I wanted safety. But sometimes those two things look exactly the same. I'm not trying to send my son to prison, Glenn. I just want him to stop. I understand. Glenn gathered the photographs and placed them in a sealed envelope. But sometimes the threat of consequences is more powerful than consequences themselves. This evidence stays in my safe. If we never need it, it never sees daylight. But if Craig or Teresa force our hand, they'll discover their victim has teeth. Exactly. Glenn filed the envelope with the trust documents, locked the safe, and handed me copies of everything. The morning had transformed me from a woman under siege into a woman with options. Defensive options. Offensive options. Legal options that Craig couldn't circumvent no matter how desperate he became. Somewhere in Lake Oswego, my son was counting down days on a lone deadline, not knowing his countdown had already ended. What happens now? I asked. We wait. Either Craig discovers the trust exists and realizes his scheme has failed, or he continues pressing forward and gives us additional evidence of harassment. Glenn walked me toward the door. My recommendation, don't confront him yet. Let him make the next mistake. And if he doesn't make a mistake, he will. Desperate people always do. At 11:47 a.m., I walked out of Glenn's office with copies of everything in my bag. The Portland streets were crowded with lunch traffic. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that an elderly woman among them had just completed the legal equivalent of loading a weapon. My phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. The same bank that had warned me about suspicious inquiries weeks ago. The message was brief and familiar. Account inquiry flagged Hartwell, Craig. He was still trying, even now. Even after Teresa's call had revealed I wasn't the confused old woman they'd assumed. Even after I'd warned them I knew about the appraisal. Even after everything. My son was still probing my accounts, still looking for a way in, still believing he could find a crack in walls I'd now reinforced with steel. I stood on the Portland sidewalk and stared at the notification. Part of me wanted to weep for the boy he'd been. Part of me wanted to rage at the man he'd become. Instead, I took a breath and made a decision. Glenn had advised waiting, but Craig didn't know the door had been locked. He was still picking at a lock that no longer mattered. It was time to tell him. I drove home from Glenn's office with the bank notification burning on my phone screen. Craig was still trying to breach walls that no longer had doors. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang again. The bank with the final piece of evidence I needed. Mrs. Hartwell, this is Pacific Coast Bank Security. The voice was professionally concerned. We're flagging another inquiry from your son's phone number. This time he was asking about wire transfer protocols. Wire transfers, not just checking balances anymore. Craig had graduated from reconnaissance to operational planning. What specifically did he want to know? Transfer limits, verification requirements, how to move large sums between accounts. The security officer paused. Given the pattern we've documented, we wanted you to be aware immediately. Thank you for letting me know. You've been very helpful. I hung up and sat in my darkroom, surrounded by photographs of wars I'd survived. 20 days. He'd been circling my accounts for 20 days, escalating from simple inquiries to forgery to transfer research. Each step documented, each violation logged. I could have called the police. I could have let Glenn file criminal charges right then and there. But I wanted Craig to hear it from me first, from the mother he'd tried to rob. At 3:47 p.m., I dialed my son's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice carrying that careful cheerfulness he'd perfected for clients and victims alike. "Mom, what a nice surprise. I was just thinking about calling you." "I'm sure you were." Something in my tone made him pause. "Is everything okay? You sound—" "I know about the bank inquiries, Craig." Silence. "I know about the forged authorization dated August 28th. I kept my voice level, each word precise. "I know about the appraiser Teresa called for my cottage. I know about the power of attorney documents you disguised as insurance paperwork." The silence stretched longer. I could hear him breathing faster now, the rhythm of a man watching his carefully constructed plans collapse. "Mom, what are you?" "I also know about your loan deadline, the $2 million you owe, the development that fell through." I paused, letting each revelation land. "I heard you begging Marcus for an extension in the parking garage. You didn't see me in the stairwell." The silence on his end was the sound of a man realizing the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "I signed papers this morning, Craig. Everything I own is now in an irrevocable trust. 70% to Lorraine, 30% to you." I waited a beat. "You're too late." "Mom!" His voice cracked. Mom, please, let me explain. I'm not finished. I picked up one of the photographs from my table, the forged signature captured under studio lighting. I have documented evidence of the forgery. My attorney has copies. If you or Teresa ever challenge my competency, ever try to overturn the trust, ever contact my bank again, that evidence goes to the district attorney. You'd send your own son to prison. You tried to steal my life, Craig, my home, my autonomy, my future. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The facts spoke loud enough. I'm offering you 30% of a substantial estate and the chance to walk away without criminal charges. That's more mercy than you showed me. I could hear movement on his end, a door closing, the creak of a chair as he sat down. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, younger somehow, the voice of a child caught in a lie that had grown too large to maintain. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Then how was it supposed to be? Teresa said... He stopped himself, started again. The loan was her idea originally. She found out about your photography collection somehow. She said you were sitting on millions while we were drowning. She said you'd never miss it, that you didn't even know what you had. So your wife convinced you to rob your own mother. She said it wasn't robbery. She said it was early inheritance, that we were just accelerating the timeline with forged signatures and secret appraisers. That was her too. I didn't know about the forgery until he stopped again, and I heard the lie forming before he could speak it. Mom, I didn't want any of this. I love you. I was just trying to save everything we'd built. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, perhaps not ever, but something like grief for the person he might have been if he'd chosen differently. Craig. Yes. You had options. You could have asked me for help. You could have been honest about your situation. Instead, you chose to scheme and forge and steal. I took a breath. That's not love. That's desperation wearing a mask. Mom, wait, please. His voice broke completely now. Let me explain properly. Let me come see you. Teresa, She what? She's not going to stop. Even now. Even knowing what you know, she's already planning something else. I heard her on the phone this morning with the doctor. Something about competency evaluations. He lowered his voice. Mom, I'm trying to warn you. Whatever you think is over, it's not. I held the phone, waiting. After 42 years, my son was finally telling the truth. The question was whether it was enough to matter. Craig's warning about the competency evaluation hung in the air between us. But I needed more than warnings. I needed the full truth. His explanation began exactly where cowards always start, with someone else's name. Mom, I swear, Teresa handled the paperwork. I didn't know she was going to forge anything. She said she had everything under control. For half people, the bank inquiries came from your phone, Craig. What? August 30th, September 8th, September 22nd this morning. I recited the dates from memory, watching them land like punches. Your phone number, your voice. According to the security team, that's not I mean. Maybe I called once, just to check on it. Check on what exactly? My account balances, wire transfer protocols. Silence. the kind of silence that comes when a man realizes his lies have been logged, dated, and filed. Mom, you have to understand the pressure we're under. The development collapsed. The investors pulled out. The loan, the $2 million you owe. You know about that, too. I've known for weeks. Craig, I heard you begging Marcus for more time. I stood in that parking garage stairwell and listened to my son admit he was about to lose everything. I let the words settle, and then I watched him go upstairs and smile at his employees like nothing was wrong. I've interviewed war criminals who took more responsibility for their actions than my son did in that moment. What was I supposed to do? His voice cracked with something between self-pity and genuine anguish. Tell everyone I failed. Watch the whole thing collapse. You could have called me. You could have been honest. I might have helped. With what? You live in a cottage on Social Security? You don't have. He stopped himself, but too late. The mask had slipped. All his concern about my mental health, all his questions about my welfare, they'd been reconnaissance for a target he believed was undefended. I don't have what? Craig money. Before he could answer, I heard scuffling. Teresa's voice, sharp and close. Give me the phone. Craig protested, muffled and weak. Then Teresa's voice cut through like a blade sharp. Furious and ultimately self-inflicted. Listen to me, Constance. I don't know what Craig told you, but we are about to lose everything. Her breathing was ragged, control slipping with every word. The loan comes due in 38 days. 38 days. Do you understand what that means? I understand perfectly. We were trying to help you. The desperation in her voice had curdled into something uglier. That cottage of yours is worth $500,000, and you're living there alone like some hermit? You don't need it. You could be in a nice facility somewhere, properly cared for. A facility with professionals, with medical staff, instead of rattling around in a house that's falling apart while we lose everything we've worked for. Thank you, Teresa. I kept my voice perfectly calm. I didn't know the exact loan deadline until just now. 38 days. That's helpful. The line went quiet. I could almost hear her rewinding her own words, recognizing the trap she'd walked into. You were also right about the cottage value, I continued. $500,000 is a reasonable estimate. It's good to know you'd done your research. That's not. And the facility comment clarifies your long-term thinking. Not just the cottage, my living situation entirely, my autonomy, my future, I paused, all of it, for sale, to save your loan. She just confessed to everything, and she didn't even realize it. Constance, you're twisting my words. I'm recording this call, Teresa. I've been recording since Craig picked up. A small lie, but a useful one. Everything you just said is documented. The deadline, the cottage plan, the intention to place me in a facility against my will. Silence. Heavy, stunned silence. In the background, I heard Craig's voice, small and horrified. What did you just say? Then Teresa, suddenly understanding. She already knew. She was waiting for us to confirm it. I've signed everything into a trust you cannot touch, I said quietly. I have evidence of forgery that will result in criminal charges if you challenge me, and now I have a recording of your confession. I let each word land with the weight it deserved. The game is over, Teresa. You lost. The breathing on the other end was ragged now. Craig saying something I couldn't make out. Teresa's whispered profanity. Don't contact my bank again. Don't contact my attorney. Don't call this number unless you're ready to apologize. I paused. And tell Craig that the 30% I left him in the trust is more than either of you deserved. He should consider himself fortunate I'm not pressing charges today. I ended the call without waiting for a response. The cottage fell silent around me. The ocean muttered beyond the windows. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with the adrenaline crash that follows any confrontation. I'd done it. I'd faced them both, documented their schemes, and emerged with everything I needed to protect myself. But victory felt hollow. My son had tried to rob me. My daughter-in-law had planned to institutionalize me. 38 days from now, their entire life would collapse. And some part of me still grieved for them. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Lorraine's number. I needed to hear the voice of a child who actually loved me. My hands were still shaking when I scrolled to Lorraine's number. After everything that had just happened, the confrontation, the confessions, the ugly truths laid bare, I needed to hear the voice of someone who loved me without conditions. I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Mom, is everything okay? Not what do you need. Not did you sign the papers. Just genuine concern, immediate and warm. I just had a very difficult conversation with your brother. About the trust. About everything. I took a breath. He's been trying to steal from me, Lorraine. Forged signatures, secret appraisals, a power of attorney that would have given him control of my entire life. Silence. Then, Mom, are you okay? That sounds exhausting. Do you need me to come over? I felt tears prick my eyes, the first I'd allowed since this whole nightmare began. Not because of what Craig had done, but because of what Lorraine had just said. Her first thought wasn't about inheritance or money or what this meant for her share. Her first thought was whether her mother needed comfort. I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm better now. I don't care about the money, Mom. Her voice was fierce and soft at the same time. I've never cared about the money. I care about you. I've always just cared about you. How had I raised two children in the same house and watched them become such different people in 30 seconds? Lorraine said everything Craig couldn't manage in 42 years. She asked about my health. She offered to drive up that night. She wanted to know if I was eating, sleeping, taking care of myself. She never once mentioned the trust percentages or the cottage value or any of the numbers that had consumed her brother's conversations. Keith says you should come stay with us for a while, Lorraine said. Get away from the cottage. Let things settle. I might take you up on that. Juniper would love it. She's been asking about the war boxes again. Lorraine paused. Mom, whatever you need, whatever this costs you emotionally, we're here, okay? Okay. I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. My son had betrayed me, but my daughter had proven exactly who she was. Some families fracture under pressure. Others reveal their true foundations. Before I show you what Craig did next, I need to pause. If you're still with me, comment your guess. Do you think Craig will apologize or escalate? Please note, the next part includes some dramatized details to convey the emotional impact. If you'd rather not continue, you're free to stop here. The call started that evening. Craig's number lit up my phone at 6:47 p.m. I let it ring. He called again at 7:12. again at 7:45. By midnight, I had 14 missed calls and a growing thread of text messages. The first ones were apologetic. "Mom, please call me back. I'm sorry. We can fix this." Then came the rationalizations. "You don't understand the pressure we've been under. I never meant to hurt you." By the next morning, something had shifted. "You're making a mistake. This trust is unfair, and you know it." I read that message 3 times. Unfair. As if the son who had forged my signature and planned to sell my home deserved equal consideration with the daughter who had never asked for anything. The messages kept coming, 37 in total over the next 2 days. I documented each one, screenshots saved to my laptop, dates and times logged. Before I tell you what Craig said next, I need to pause. His tone changed on the second day. "Mom, I'm worried about you. You're not thinking clearly. This isn't like you. For your own good." 4 words that every tyrant uses to justify control. The text became clinical, almost detached. "Maybe you should talk to someone professional about these decisions you're making." And then, "Teresa knows a doctor who specializes in geriatric assessment. It might give everyone peace of mind." Peace of mind. He was laying groundwork, building a paper trail of concerned family member messages that could be presented to a court if he decided to challenge my competency. I showed the text to Glenn that afternoon. His expression darkened as he scrolled. "This is classic competency challenge preparation," he said. He's creating evidence that he expressed concern, that he suggested professional evaluation, that he tried to help. Can he actually have me declared incompetent? He can try, but we have the trust documents, the recorded consultation, and now these messages showing clear harassment. Glenn handed back my phone. "Keep documenting every call, every text. If this goes to court, we want a complete record of escalation." I read Craig's final text 3 times that night. "Mom, if you can't see that you're not thinking straight, maybe a professional needs to evaluate the situation. We're considering all our options." He wasn't apologizing anymore. He wasn't negotiating. He was preparing to have me declared incompetent to take by legal force what he couldn't steal by deception. I called Lorraine back. "Can I take you up on that offer? I think I need to stay with you for a while. Come tonight if you want. Your room is ready." The cottage had been my sanctuary for 30 years. But Craig knew where I lived. He knew my routines. He knew how to find me. The only safe place left was with the child who actually loved me. Craig's threat echoed in my mind as I packed. Maybe a professional needs to evaluate the situation. I wasn't going to wait for them to bring the fight to my doorstep. The morning after his final text, I loaded 1 suitcase into my car and drove to the only place in Oregon where I knew I'd be safe. Lorraine was waiting on the porch when I pulled into her driveway. She'd taken the day off from the hospital, still in her bathrobe at 10 in the morning, something she never did unless family needed her. Keith Mercer met me at the car before I could reach for my bag. At 40, my son-in-law still had chalk dust on his sleeve from the school day before, a high school history teacher who'd never lost his enthusiasm for the classroom. He pulled my suitcase from the trunk without a word of judgment or curiosity. "Guest room's all ready, Mrs. Hartwell," he said. "Juniper helped pick the flowers." Lorraine wrapped me in a hug at the door, the kind of embrace that said everything without words. I stood in their doorway and realized I'd been looking for home in the wrong house for years. Lorraine's house smelled like coffee and laundry detergent and something I couldn't name at first until I realized it was the scent of being wanted. Juniper appeared at the top of the stairs, practically vibrating with excitement. "Grandma, did you bring the boxes?" "Some of them, the most important ones. Stay as long as you need, Mom." Lorraine guided me toward the kitchen. "This is your home, too." I'd left my cottage, my sanctuary of 30 years, but I hadn't retreated. I'd repositioned. Here. I was surrounded by people who would testify to my sanity, who would stand with me against whatever Craig was planning. Here, his lawyers would have to get through a teacher, a nurse, and an 11-year-old who thought I was a hero before they could touch me. The day passed in quiet comfort. Keith made lunch. Lorraine fielded work calls while pretending not to hover. I sat on their back porch and watched the Columbia River win toward the sea, feeling my shoulders unknot for the first time in weeks. That evening, after dinner, Juniper appeared with the Vietnam film box cradled in her arms. "Grandma," she settled cross-legged on the living room floor, the box between us like a treasure chest waiting to be opened. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything, Hunie." "Last time you told me the safe stories, the ones about cameras and deadlines and monsoon rain." She looked up at me with those clear, perceptive eyes. "But I've been thinking, the real stories, the ones you never told anyone, those are different, aren't they?" I hesitated. Lorraine had paused in the kitchen doorway, watching. "They're not easy stories, sweetheart. Some of them are very sad." "I know," Juniper didn't flinch. "But you took those pictures for a reason. You wanted people to see things that mattered, right?" "Right." "Then tell me. Tell me the real ones. Let me tell you what it feels like to watch a child understand you in ways your own son never did." I picked up my old press badge from the box, laminated, faded, stamped with a date from 1974. Juniper held it like it was made of gold. "This photograph," I said, pulling out a print I hadn't shown anyone in decades, "was taken on the last day before Saigon fell." The image showed a mother and her children climbing onto a helicopter, faces frozen in terror and hope. I'd been 23 years old, operating on no sleep and pure adrenaline, knowing the city behind me was about to disappear into history. I took this because no one back home could see what was happening. The politicians said everything was fine. The newspapers printed what they were told. I touched the edge of the photograph. "But cameras don't lie, Junie. Photographs show the truth, whether people want to see it or not." "Did you ever get scared?" "Every single day. But the fear wasn't the point. The point was making sure people couldn't look away." Juniper listened to every word, asking questions that showed she understood more than any 11-year-old should. She wanted to know about the soldiers I'd photographed, the families I'd followed, the moments I'd captured that had changed public opinion or saved lives. These photographs saved people, Junie. They showed the world what it couldn't ignore. "That's what I want to do," she said quietly. "Show people things that matter." I looked at this child, my granddaughter, raised by a daughter who had never stopped loving me and understood that legacy wasn't about money at all. It was about passing something forward that mattered. Lorraine's phone buzzed in the kitchen. I heard her footsteps stop, heard the sharp intake of breath. When she appeared in the doorway, her face had gone pale. "Mom," she said quietly, "I just got a message from a friend at the courthouse. Teresa called Craig's lawyer this afternoon." She paused. "They're filing something tomorrow, an emergency petition. Juniper looked between us, confused. What does that mean? It means, I said slowly, that your uncle is trying to have me declared incompetent to manage my own life. The war had followed me here, and tomorrow the next battle would begin. The emergency petition arrived 3 days later, not by mail, but by courier. The knock came at 7 a.m., before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Lorraine signed for the envelope, her face going white as she read the papers. "Mom," her voice was barely a whisper, "they're not just questioning your mind. They're saying you're suicidal." I took the documents from her trembling hands. The petition was thick, professionally prepared, stamped with the seal of the Clatsop County Court. Craig's name appeared as petitioner. The requested action, emergency guardianship of Constance Hartwell, with immediate transfer of all financial and medical decision-making authority. The grounds listed made my stomach turn. Statements indicating self-harm intent. They'd twisted something I'd said at dinner months ago, that I'd be willing to die for my work, meaning I'd risk my life for a photograph. Now it was evidence of suicidal ideation. Erratic financial behavior meant refusing to sign their power of attorney. Isolation from family meant living in my cottage instead of a facility they controlled. I'd seen documents like this before in Sarajevo, 1993. Bureaucratic papers that stripped people of their humanity with sterile language. Ethnic cleansing, they called it on paper. Now my own family was cleansing me from my life with legal terminology. "The hearing is scheduled for Monday," Lorraine said, reading over my shoulder. "That's 48 hours from now. Emergency petitions move fast. They're counting on us being unprepared." "Mom, this names Craig as your guardian. If they win, they won't win." I set down the papers. "Call Glenn, now." Lorraine was reaching for her phone when the doorbell rang again. Teresa stood on the porch, perfectly composed, in a cream blazer and pearl earrings. Her perfume invaded the kitchen before she did Chanel No. 5, the same scent she'd worn at Emma's christening years ago, when she'd whispered to Craig that the baby looked nothing like a Hartwell. I'd caught that moment too, filed it away like a negative waiting to be developed. "Lorraine," Teresa stepped inside without being invited, "we need to talk." "You're not welcome here," Lorraine said. "I understand emotions are running high." Teresa's voice was smooth, practiced. "But this doesn't have to be ugly. I'm here to offer a solution. A solution to the lawsuit you just filed against my mother." Teresa ignored me entirely, focusing on Lorraine. "The petition requires supporting testimony. Family members who can speak to Constance's mental state." She paused. "If you sign an affidavit supporting our concerns, this can be resolved quietly. No public hearing, no embarrassment." "You want me to testify against my own mother?" "I want you to tell the truth about what you've observed. The confusion, the paranoia, the increasingly erratic decisions." Teresa smiled. "In return, Craig and I are prepared to guarantee your portion of the estate remains intact, regardless of how the trust reads now." The bribe hung in the air, naked and obscene. Watching my daughter stand there, spine straight, eyes blazing, I saw myself at 30, facing down a border guard in East Berlin who demanded my film. Some things you don't surrender. Some things are worth the fight, even when you might lose. "Get out of my house," Lorraine said. "Think carefully. This petition includes details about your background that might become public record. Teresa's voice dropped. Your adoption, for instance. The circumstances surrounding it. There are things I've discovered that your mother apparently never told you. I felt Lorraine stiffen beside me. She'd known she was adopted since childhood, but Teresa was implying something more. Secrets I'd supposedly kept? Ammunition she could deploy. Whatever you think you know, Lorraine said quietly, it doesn't change who my mother is, and it doesn't change my answer. You're making a mistake. No, Teresa, you are. Lorraine moved toward the door. My attorney is Glenn Whitaker. Any further communication goes through him. Now leave before I call the police. Teresa's composure cracked for just a moment, a flash of fury beneath the polished surface. Then she recovered, smoothing her blazer. 48 hours, Lorraine. Think about what you're choosing. She turned and walked out. The door closed behind her. Lorraine exhaled shakily. Mom, what was she talking about? My adoption? Later, sweetheart. I promise. I moved toward the window, watching Teresa's car pull away. Something caught my eye on the porch. She dropped something. A folded paper lay on the welcome mat, escaped from Teresa's designer bag. I picked it up and unfolded it. A name, a phone number, a note in Teresa's handwriting. Confirmed testimony for Monday. Standard fee applies. Dr. Harrison Moore. The name triggered something, a memory from 5 years ago. A story I'd photographed for a magazine piece on elder fraud. Families hiring psychiatrists to declare competency challenges against elderly relatives. Doctors with disciplinary records who would testify to anything for the right price. Lorraine, get me my laptop. Why, what is it? Dr. Harrison Moore. I stared at the name, pieces clicking into place. Their expert witness. I think I know exactly who this doctor is. I remembered the article now. 3 families, 3 inheritance disputes, 3 elderly victims declared incompetent on Dr. Moore's testimony. He'd been disciplined by the medical board, fined, suspended briefly, but still practicing, still available to anyone who needed an expert opinion that matched their checkbook. If I'm right, I said slowly, they just made their first mistake. Teresa had dropped her ammunition list, and on it was the name of a doctor with a fraud history a mile long. The hearing was in 48 hours. We had work to do. The research took me until midnight, but by then I had everything I needed. 3 browser tabs glowed on my laptop. Doctor, Moore's medical board disciplinary record, his connection to 4 suspicious guardianship cases, and Alara Galloway's direct number. The pattern was undeniable. This doctor had testified against elderly defendants in inheritance disputes at least 3 times before. And in each case, his fees had been paid through the same law firm Craig was using. I called Alara at 6 a.m. They want to paint me senile, I said when she answered. Let's give the world a master class in memory. Alara was already ahead of me. A career retrospective interview. We document your recall, your analytical skills, your professional judgment. Time it to drop before the hearing. Can you move that fast? I can have a crew there by Thursday. I heard her typing in the background. We'll make it impossible for any court to ignore. Living legend versus hired gun psychiatrist. The optics alone will destroy their case. Lorraine appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her robe. She'd heard enough. Mom, are you sure, once this goes public, there's no taking it back? They made it public when they filed an emergency petition claiming I was suicidal. I closed my laptop. I'm done defending quietly. It's time to fight where everyone can see. When did protecting your family become indistinguishable from fighting a war? The next 3 days blurred into preparation. Glenn filed motions to delay the hearing, citing insufficient notice. Elara arranged the interview for Thursday at Lorraine's house. And on Tuesday morning, Lorraine drove me to Portland for what would become my most important test since the fall of Saigon. The neuropsychological evaluation took place in a medical office that smelled of antiseptic and printer toner. Dr. Patricia Weston conducted the assessment, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with reading glasses perpetually perched on her head. The kind of direct gaze that reminded me of the best field surgeons I'd known overseas. "We'll start with memory and recall," she said, arranging test materials on the desk between us. Then move to executive function, problem solving, and cognitive flexibility. The testing room felt like a courtroom already. Every answer a piece of evidence, every pause potentially damning. I completed word lists, pattern recognition, and mathematical sequences. I recounted historical events with exact dates. When she asked me to describe my career chronologically, I walked her through 40 years of war photography without missing a single assignment or location. 3 hours later, Dr. Weston set down her clipboard. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'd hire you as a consultant." She shook her head slowly. "These results are exceptional. You're scoring in the 98th percentile for your age group, and frankly, you're outperforming most of the 40-year-olds I've tested. Will this hold up against their so-called expert? Dr. Moore's opinion won't survive 5 minutes against this documentation." She handed me a folder. Full written report with my credentials and methodology, notarized, time-stamped, bulletproof. Lorraine squeezed my hand as we left the examination room. The relief on her face mirrored my own. We stopped at the front desk to collect the final paperwork. The receptionist was on the phone, distracted, shuffling through files. While I waited, my eyes drifted to the sign-in sheet on the counter, a clipboard with names, dates, and appointment times. I almost looked away. Almost. Teresa's signature, right there, dated September 18th. My blood went cold. September 18th was 10 days before the emergency petition was filed. 10 days before any legal action had begun. Teresa had been here in this office, signing in with her full name while I was still eating dinner at their house, and signing documents I thought were insurance forms. I leaned closer, reading the appointment notation. Consultation Dr. Harmon, Geriatric Assessment Protocols. Dr. Harmon. The name nagged at me. I'd seen it somewhere in my midnight research. Then it clicked. Dr. James Harmon, Dr. Harrison Moore's former medical partner. They'd shared a practice for 12 years before Moore's disciplinary action. The medical board investigation had mentioned Harmon as a witness, but had declined to pursue separate charges. "Mom," Lorraine touched my arm. "What is it?" I pulled out my phone and photographed the sign-in sheet before the receptionist could notice. "Teresa was here," I said quietly, 2 weeks before they filed anything. She came to consult with Dr. Moore's former partner about geriatric assessment protocols. Lorraine's face hardened. She was shopping for a diagnosis. She was laying groundwork, learning what she'd need to claim, what language to use, what expert testimony to procure. I stared at the photograph on my phone. This wasn't Craig's idea, Lorraine. This has been Teresa's operation from the beginning. The drive back to Astoria was silent. I sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through the connections I'd mapped. Dr. Moore, Dr. Harmon, Craig's law firm, Teresa's early consultation, the forged signatures, the cottage appraisal, the power of attorney trap. Every thread led back to one person. My son was a coward and a thief, but my daughter-in-law was the architect. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer, and Craig was just the tool she'd used to execute it. The hearing is in 3 days, Lorraine said. What do we do? We show them everything. I looked at the evaluation folder in my lap, at the photograph of Teresa's signature, at the pattern of fraud I'd finally pieced together. And we make sure they never recover. Armed with evidence of Teresa's conspiracy, I turned to the one arena where I'd always been strongest, my work. The hearing had been postponed for 2 weeks, thanks to Glenn's motions, and Alara had arranged for me to review my archived photographs at the museum. The Portland Art Museum archives smelled of preservation chemicals and old secrets I had no idea one of those secrets would hand me. Nuclear weapon. Alara had pulled boxes of my Vietnam-era work for the retrospective interview. We sat at a long table, sorting negatives and contact sheets into chronological order, building a visual timeline of my career that would make any competency challenge laughable. 1974, 1975, early 1976, Alara murmured. Labeling folders. We'll need... She stopped. Constance, look at this. She held up a contact sheet from March 1975. Military Tribunal Documentation, one of my lesser-known series, photographing court-martial proceedings for an overseas wire service. I'd taken thousands of images during that period, most of them forgotten. But this face wasn't forgettable. A young officer sat at the defendant's table, his features frozen in the particular expression of a man watching his career collapse. Frank hair, prominent jaw, deep-set eyes that even in black and white radiated arrogance mixed with fear. "Tell me that's not who I think it is," Alara said quietly. I pulled out my reading glasses and studied the image. The caption I'd scrawled decades ago read, "Lieutenant Gerald Brennan, convicted of military contract fraud, Fort Bragg Tribunal." Some photographs capture moments. Others capture lies waiting 50 years to surface. "Brennan," I said slowly. "He was convicted of falsifying equipment contracts, skimming money from military suppliers. They stripped his rank and gave him a dishonorable discharge. And then he disappeared from public record." I set down the contact sheet. Until just now. I pulled up a photograph from last Christmas on my phone, one of the few family gatherings I'd attended at Craig's house. Teresa's father stood in the background, distinguished silver hair, expensive watch, the bearing of a man who expected deference. Gerald Thornton, retired military officer, decorated veteran, pillar of his community. The same eyes, the same jaw, 50 years older, but unmistakably the same man. Teresa's maiden name was Thornton, I said. Her father told everyone he was a decorated veteran who served with distinction. But he was actually a convicted fraudster who changed his name after discharge. I looked at the tribunal photograph again. Her entire family history is a fabrication. The prestigious military background, the old money respectability, all of it built on a lie. Alara sat back in her chair. If this came out, her social standing would collapse. The country club memberships, the board positions, everything she spent 30 years building. I understood now why the Hartwell money mattered so much. She's not just greedy, Alara. She's desperate. If she loses the money, she loses the facade. And if she loses the facade, what does it cost to become someone else entirely? And what happens when the receipt finally comes due? I took the photograph home that evening and sat with it in Lorraine's living room. The old image felt heavy in my hands, charged with decades of concealed truth. Lorraine appeared in the doorway. "Mom, what is that?" I told her everything. The tribunal, the name change, the fabricated history. By the end, Lorraine was pacing. "You could end her with this." Her voice was tight with anger. "After everything she's done, the forgery, the guardianship petition, the threats, you could destroy her completely." I could. One phone call to the right journalist, one social media post. Her entire world crumbles. I looked at my daughter so fierce in her loyalty, so ready to fight. I'd felt the same fury countless times in my career, watching powerful people escape consequences while victims suffered. But I'd also seen what happened when destruction became the goal rather than justice. "I photographed villages after ethnic cleansing," I said quietly. "Communities destroyed so completely that nothing could grow back. Revenge doesn't rebuild. It just spreads the damage." "Mom, she tried to have you declared incompetent. She forged your signature. I know what she did." I set down the photograph. "And I know what I'm capable of doing in return. But total destruction isn't the goal. The goal is stopping her, making sure she can never threaten me again." "So what do you do with that picture?" "I keep it, secured and documented." I met Lorraine's eyes, and I let Teresa know I have it without ever using it publicly. She backs off the competency challenge, drops all claims, and walks away. In return, her father's secret stays buried. Mercy wasn't weakness. It was the one weapon Teresa would never see coming. Lorraine shook her head slowly. "You're a better person than I am. Mom, I'm a strategic person. There's a difference." The next morning, I locked the photograph in my safety deposit box at the Astoria Bank. Secure, inaccessible, but ready if needed. Then I drove back to Lorraine's house and waited. My phone buzzed at noon, Craig's number. I almost didn't answer, but something in the rhythm of the rings felt different, hesitant, desperate. "Mother," his voice was low, almost a whisper. "We need to talk. Teresa doesn't know I'm calling." I said nothing, waiting. "I think I've made a terrible mistake." His voice cracked on the last word. "Please, let me explain. I'll come alone." I looked out the window at the gray October sky. "Come tomorrow," I said. "Just you." Craig came alone the next day, as promised. We talked for 2 hours in Lorraine's living room. Not about forgiveness, not about reconciliation, but about the truth. He admitted Teresa had orchestrated everything. He admitted his own cowardice. And he agreed to sign whatever was necessary to end this. 2 days later, Glenn Whitaker's conference room smelled like leather and old money. The perfect stage for what I was about to do to my son's scheme. Craig and Teresa sat on one side of the mahogany table. Glenn and I sat on the other. The attorneys had already exchanged preliminary documents, but this meeting would determine everything. Before Glenn could speak, Craig reached across the table and slipped me a folded piece of paper. Teresa didn't notice. She was too busy arranging her own documents with theatrical precision. I unfolded it beneath the table. Craig's handwriting, cramped and urgent. "I'm sorry. I'll sign whatever you need. Just don't show the photo." He knew, somehow. Between our conversation and this meeting, he'd learned about the tribunal photograph. Whether Teresa had told him or he'd discovered it himself, Craig understood the leverage I held, and he was choosing to protect her secret rather than fight me. "Let's begin," Glenn said. He opened a folder and slid documents toward Craig and Teresa. "We've prepared withdrawal papers for the guardianship petition. Full dismissal with prejudice." "This is premature," Teresa started. We've also prepared a detailed report for the medical board regarding Dr. Harrison Moore's involvement in this case." Glenn's voice remained pleasant, including his previous disciplinary actions and his financial relationship with your law firm. Teresa's face went still. "Additionally, we have Dr. Patricia Weston's comprehensive competency evaluation, which places Mrs. Hartwell in the 98th percentile for cognitive function." Glenn paused. "And documentation of a forged bank authorization that constitutes criminal fraud." Victory tasted like copper metallic. Necessary. Nothing like the sweetness I'd imagined. "The trust stands exactly as written," I said quietly. 70% to Lorraine, 30% to Craig. Not subject to challenge, not subject to revision. Teresa's composure cracked. "You wouldn't dare go public with—" "Some family histories don't bear scrutiny, Teresa." I met her eyes. "I'm sure you understand what I mean." The blood drained from her face. For one moment, I saw behind the careful construction of her persona the terror of a woman whose entire identity could collapse with a single photograph. "Teresa," Craig's voice was tired, defeated. "Sign the papers." "Craig, we discussed." "Sign them." She stared at him, then at me, then at the documents in front of her. The pen trembled in her hand as she scrawled her signature on the withdrawal form. Craig signed without meeting my eyes. Glenn collected the papers. "I believe we're done here." I stood, gathering my things. At the door, I paused. "Craig," he looked up, his face a mask of shame and exhaustion. "You can still call me when you're ready to be my son again." He didn't answer, but something flickered in his eyes. Grief, maybe, or the faint memory of who he used to be. You spend 74 years learning that family isn't blood. It's who shows up when the blood turns cold. 2 days later, my war photography exhibition opened at the Portland Art Museum. The gallery was packed. Critics, collectors, journalists, all gathered to celebrate a career I'd kept hidden for decades. Elara had done remarkable work. The retrospective interview had aired that morning, and suddenly everyone wanted to meet the legendary photographer who'd been teaching community college in anonymity. Lorraine stood beside me in a blue dress, Keith's hand resting proudly on her shoulder. Juniper darted between exhibits, pointing at photographs and announcing to anyone who would listen that her grandmother had been very brave. "Grandma, that's you in the picture." She tugged my sleeve in front of the Saigon 74 print. "You were helping that soldier. You were so brave." "I was just doing my job, Junie." "Your job was being brave," she said, with 11-year-old certainty. "That's the best job." Elara appeared with champagne. "To Constance Hartwell," she said, raising her glass, "proof that the best lens captures truth. The applause filled the gallery, warm and validating after so many weeks of ugliness. I smiled, accepted congratulations, signed catalogs. But my eyes kept drifting to the 2 empty chairs in the front row. Lorraine noticed. The empty chairs hurt, don't they? They always will, I admitted. I'd reserved those seats for Craig and Teresa. A final olive branch. A last chance to be present for something that mattered. They hadn't come. The applause filled the gallery, but my eyes kept drifting to those 2 empty chairs as the crowd dispersed and I signed my last autograph. I looked toward the entrance. The October rain had started, streaking the glass doors with silver, and there he was. Craig stood outside the museum, alone, rain soaking through his coat, his palm pressed against the glass like a child locked out of his own home. He was watching the celebration he couldn't bring himself to join, the mother he'd betrayed, surrounded by the family he'd lost. I raised my hand. Behind him, headlights flashed twice. Teresa's car, waiting at the curb like a leash. Craig turned away, his shoulders hunched against the rain as he walked toward the car, toward the woman who controlled him, toward a life built on secrets and fear. I lowered my hand. The legal battle was won, but my son was still lost. The image of Craig standing in the rain haunted me for days, his palm pressed against the glass, watching his mother's triumph from the outside. I'd raised my hand to wave, but he'd already turned away. 2 weeks passed without a word from him, and I'd stopped checking my phone for his name. Then Alara's call lit up the screen with news that would change everything except what mattered most. "Constance, are you sitting down?" Her voice was breathless, almost giddy. "The hammer just fell at Christie's." "Your Saigon 74. Print. The Marine carrying his wounded friend sold for $2.3 million. I set down my coffee cup. "Say that again." $2.3 million. 3 collectors got into a bidding war for 20 minutes. The auctioneer said he's never seen anything like it. Lorraine appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her scrubs from the morning shift. She must have seen something in my face. "Mom, what is it?" "The Vietnam photograph," I said slowly. "The one Craig called old war junk when he was pressuring me to sign those papers. It just sold for more than everything he tried to steal." Lorraine sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Alara was still talking something about additional sales, about collector interest, about updated estate valuations. I heard the numbers without fully processing them. $8 million. That's what my collection was now worth, combined with the insurance proceeds and my savings. $8 million that had been nearly invisible 6 months ago, hidden in darkroom files and safety deposit boxes. What's the exchange rate between dollars and the son who won't answer your calls? "Mom, you're worth $8 million, Lorraine said when I hung up. Her voice carried something between wonder and grief. "Craig tried to steal 6. He forged your signature, broke into your home, hired a corrupt psychiatrist, all for money that turned out to be a fraction of what you actually had. The irony isn't lost on me. He could have just asked." Lorraine shook her head. "If he'd come to you honestly, told you about the loan, asked for help, you would have given it, wouldn't you?" I thought about that question for a long moment. Would I have written a check for $2 million to save Craig's company before all this? Probably, yes. I'd given him hundreds of thousands over the years without hesitation. But he hadn't asked. He'd schemed, forged, manipulated. He'd tried to steal my autonomy rather than request my help. I don't know anymore, I admitted, and I suppose that's the tragedy of it. That evening, Lorraine and I sat on her back porch, watching the sunset paint the Columbia River in shades of copper and rose. The October air smelled of fallen leaves and wood smoke from somewhere down the street. Keith was inside grading papers. Juniper was doing homework at the kitchen table. $8 million, enough to build walls around yourself forever, or bridges back to everyone you've lost. I could buy a dozen cottages on the coast now, you know, I said. Beachfront properties, staff. Never cook another meal if I didn't want to. But you're staying here. It wasn't a question. Where else would I go? I watched a heron take flight from the riverbank. This house has something money can't buy, Lorraine. It has people who want me here. Not for what I can give them, just for me. That's always been true, Mom. The money doesn't change that. No, but it clarifies things. I thought about the years I'd spent hiding my wealth, protecting myself from exactly the kind of exploitation Craig had attempted. I built a fortune because my work mattered, not because I wanted to be rich. The money was always just evidence that someone valued what I created. And now I know who values me. I reached for my daughter's hand, not the photographs, me. The sunset painted the water gold, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel poor at all. We sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened. Juniper brought out hot chocolate, then retreated inside to finish her homework. Keith waved through the window. The sounds of a family evening surrounded us. Water running, music playing softly, the ordinary rhythms of people who loved each other. Around 9 o'clock, I headed upstairs to the guest room that had become my home. At the door, my foot caught on something. An envelope slipped under the gap. No stamp, no return address, just my name, written in cramped handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Craig. I picked up the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were 3 sentences and a hotel key card. Teresa filed for divorce yesterday. She's taking everything she can. I have nowhere else to turn. The key card was from a motel in Seaside, 20 minutes down the coast. Not the Lake Oswego mansion, not the Pearl District office. A $40 a night motel where desperate people went when their lives collapsed. I sat on the bed and read the 3 sentences again. Then again. My son had tried to steal my life. He'd forged my signature, invaded my home, attempted to have me declared incompetent. He'd stood in the rain outside my exhibition and walked away rather than face me. And now he had nowhere else to turn. I looked at the key card in my palm, a small piece of plastic that represented either the beginning of reconciliation or the final proof that Craig only came to me when he needed something. The question was whether I still wanted to find out which. I kept the key card in my pocket for 2 weeks, turning it over in my fingers at night, never quite able to drive to that motel. Then one November afternoon, the decision was taken from me. He stood on Lorraine's porch without Teresa for the first time in 15 years, thinner, grayer, holding nothing but his car keys and whatever was left of his pride. "Mom." His voice cracked on the single syllable. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. Lorraine and Keith were inside. This conversation belonged to us alone. "You could have used the key card," Craig said. I wasn't sure what I'd find if I did. He nodded slowly, accepting that. We stood in silence for a long moment. Two people who used to know how to talk to each other. "Can I come in?" he asked finally. Not to ask for anything, just to be here with you. I led him to the living room. He sat on the edge of Lorraine's couch like a guest who wasn't sure of his welcome, which I supposed he wasn't. "I don't want to talk about the trust. Mom," he looked at his hands, "I want to know if you're okay. Are you sleeping? Eating? How's your health?" The questions surprised me. No manipulation, no agenda, just a son asking about his mother. "I'm fine, Craig. Better than I've been in years, actually." Watching your child become a stranger is grief without a funeral. No casket, no closure. Just absence wearing a familiar face. "She had me convinced you were losing your mind," he said quietly. "Teresa." She showed me articles about elderly dementia, told me stories about your confusion. She said we needed to act before you gave everything away to scammers or lost it to bad decisions. And you believed her. I wanted to believe her. He met my eyes. Because the alternative was admitting I'd been too busy to visit, too wrapped up in my own problems to check on you myself. She gave me an excuse. The honesty was unexpected. I waited for more. I should have visited. I should have seen for myself. Craig's voice dropped. I should have called you on your birthday instead of letting Teresa handle the cards. She told me she sent them every year. She did send cards, generic ones, signed with both your names. Nothing personal. I know. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something I didn't expect. A shoebox, weathered and dusty. I found these in her closet last week, hidden in the back behind old clothes. He set the box on the coffee table between us. What are those? Open it. I lifted the lid. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, in my own handwriting. Birthday cards, Christmas letters, notes I'd sent over the years when I was missing my son, all addressed to Craig, all unopened. How many years had I blamed him for silence that wasn't even his choice? She intercepted them, Craig said. Every single one, for 15 years. Mom, I never knew you were reaching out. I thought you'd given up on me. I picked up an envelope from 2012. A birthday card I remembered writing after Lawrence died, when I desperately wanted to reconnect with my son. The seal was still intact. He'd never even touched it. Why would she do this? Control. Craig's jaw tightened. She didn't want anyone in my life who might see through her. You would have. Dad would have. So she cut me off and convinced me you were the one doing the cutting. I set down the envelope, unable to open it yet. The betrayal wasn't just Craig's. It was Teresa's. Systematic and deliberate. A 15-year campaign to isolate my son from everyone who loved him. The trust stays as written, I said finally. 70% to Lorraine. That's not punishment, Craig. It's consequence. She was here when I needed family, and you weren't. I know. I'm not going to pretend the last few months didn't happen. The forgery, the guardianship petition, the threats, those were real. Those hurt. I know, Mom. So what do you want? He looked at me with eyes that held something I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability without calculation. I'm not asking for money. I don't want anything from the trust. He paused. I'm asking for another chance. To be your son again. To earn back what I threw away. The box of letters felt heavier than $8 million. 15 years of love returned to sender. Then earn it, I said. Show up when there's nothing to gain. Call when you don't need anything. Visit when it's inconvenient. That's where we start. I can do that. You'll have to prove it. Not with words, with time. He nodded, accepting the terms. No negotiation, no defense, just acceptance. We talked until sunset. He told me about his father asked for the real stories, the ones I'd never shared. I told him about Lawrence's secret insurance, about the decades of protecting myself without anyone knowing. We didn't fix anything. But for the first time in years, we were talking. After he left, I sat alone with the box of letters. I opened the first envelope with trembling hands, a birthday card from 2012, my handwriting still hopeful. Inside, I'd written, "No matter what happens, you'll always be my son. Call when you're ready." He'd never seen it. None of them. Teresa had stolen our decade before we knew it was gone. But decades could be rebuilt, one conversation at a time. The stolen letters became a ritual. Each night, I opened one envelope, reading what I'd written to a son who never received it. The grief was sharp, but so was the hope, because Craig had finally come home, even if the road back would be long. 2 weeks after his visit, I drove to Cannon Beach to begin letting go of the cottage that had sheltered me for 30 years. The dark room smelled exactly as it had for 4 decades. Developer fluid, fixer, and the particular magic of images emerging from nothing. But this time, I wasn't alone. Juniper stood beside me, her grandmother's eyes wide with anticipation, as I showed her how to load film onto a developing reel. "Watch the shadows first," I told her. "That's where the truth hides." She nodded with the seriousness of a child who understood she was being trusted with something important. I guided her hands through the process, agitating the tank, timing the chemicals, preparing the stop bath, while she worked. I opened boxes I hadn't touched in years, prints from the 70s, contact sheets from forgotten assignments, and in one dusty container, photographs I'd completely forgotten taking. Craig at 5 years old, building sandcastles on this very beach. Craig at 8, holding his first camera, a battered Polaroid I'd bought him for his birthday. Craig at 12, laughing at something Lawrence had said, his face still open and trusting. The sweet boy he'd been before Teresa, before the ambition, before the lies. Teaching Juniper to develop film felt like passing a torch in slow motion, flame to flame, generation to generation. Light finding new hands. "Grandma, I can see it." Juniper's voice pulled me back. She was staring into the developing tray, watching an image emerge from the chemical bath. A photograph she'd taken that morning, the cottage through fog, mysterious and beautiful. The picture's appearing. "You have the patience for this," I said. "That's the real gift, seeing what others miss." She looked at me with an expression I recognized, the same hunger I'd felt at her age, the same need to capture what was fleeting. Whatever happened to my legacy? The money, the recognition, the museum retrospectives. This was what actually mattered. A child who understood. "Can I take these home?" She held up the photographs of her uncle as a boy. "I want to show my dad." "Take them. Show Craig, too, when he visits." 5 days later, I made my announcement over dinner at Lorraine's house. The family gathered around the table, Lorraine and Keith. Juniper doing homework in the corner. The comfortable chaos of people who belong together. "I've decided to sell the Cannon Beach cottage." Lorraine set down her fork. Mom, let me finish, I smiled. I found a place on Maple Street, 3 blocks from here. Ocean view from the kitchen, small garden, room for a proper darkroom in the basement. You're staying? Keith asked. I'm staying close, neighbors, not dependents. I looked at my daughter. Near enough to share dinners, far enough to keep my dignity. You spend a lifetime building something, terrified it dies with you. Then a child proves the work was never really yours to begin with. Lorraine's eyes glistened. Mom, you don't have to sell the cottage. We can. I want to. That house was my sanctuary when I needed hiding. But I don't need hiding anymore. I reached for her hand. I need family. Just looking at with my favorite properly. If you want to push. Juniper looked up from her homework. Does this mean you'll be here for my photography show, Miss? Bennett says I can exhibit 3 prints. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Keith caught my eye across the table. He was smiling in that quiet way of his. About the Maple Street place, he said carefully. I may have already contacted the realtor. Keith, we've been hoping you'd decide to stay close. Lorraine and I talked about it weeks ago. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. They're holding it for you. First showing tomorrow, if you're interested. 3 blocks. Close enough to matter. Far enough to breathe. I signed the purchase agreement the following afternoon. The Maple Street cottage was smaller than Cannon Beach. 2 bedrooms instead of 3, a modest kitchen, a view of the water that wasn't quite as dramatic. But it had everything I needed. Proximity to family, space for my work, and the independence I'd fought so hard to protect. As I set down the pen, my phone buzzed. A text from Craig. Divorce finalized yesterday. I'm staying at a motel in Seaside. Is your offer still open? I stared at the message. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have answered. 2 months ago, I might have said no, but the letters had changed something. Those 15 years of stolen love had proven that my son hadn't abandoned me by choice. He'd been manipulated by someone who'd made isolation into art. I looked at Lorraine, who was reading over my shoulder. Tell him there's a spare room here, she said slowly, until he figures things out. Are you sure? He's my brother, Mom, and he's trying. She paused. That's more than he was doing 6 months ago. I typed my reply. Come for dinner Sunday. We'll talk. The response came immediately. Thank you. 2 words. But they carried the weight of everything we'd lost and everything we might still rebuild. The January light through my kitchen window fell exactly the way Beirut light fell in 1987. Golden, forgiving, full of lies about safety. But this morning, arranging tulips Lorraine brought from the farmer's market, I understood that some lies become truths if you live inside them long enough. My cottage on Maple Street had been mine for 6 weeks now. 700 square feet of cedar and glass that smelled like wood polish and the lavender sachets Juniper made me for Christmas. The walls held 32 photographs, not my war work, not the images that made my reputation, but pictures I'd taken since September. Lorraine laughing over burnt pancakes, Juniper's hands adjusting a camera strap, the Pacific horizon at sunset, shot from my new porch. I had become at 74 a different kind of photographer entirely. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The doorbell rang at 9. Juniper stood on my porch holding her Nikon, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. Light's perfect, she announced, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. the way family does. Grandma says we're doing portraits today. She'd stopped calling me Mrs. Hartwell in November. Now I was just Constance. Or sometimes, when she was feeling particularly bold, Connie. No one had called me Connie since Edward died. I found I didn't mind. Your grandmother sent you to practice on an old woman. She sent me to learn from the best. Juniper grinned, already assessing the light angles in my living room. Her words. Also, she says you need to eat more because you're getting too thin. Lorraine thinks everyone needs to eat more. That's because Grandma's right about everything. I couldn't argue with that particular truth. We spent 2 hours working on portrait lighting. Juniper's focus as intense as any professional I'd mentored. She had the eye. More importantly, she had the patience, that willingness to wait for the moment instead of forcing it. You couldn't teach that. Either a photographer possessed it, or they spent their career capturing surfaces instead of souls. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. At noon, my phone buzzed with a text. I knew before looking that it would be from Teresa. Marcus says the trust restructuring was legally questionable. We could challenge it. Craig deserves his full inheritance. Call me. I read the message twice. Then I deleted it without replying and set my phone face down on the counter. Some people never changed. Teresa would spend the rest of her life believing she'd been cheated, that my money had somehow belonged to her all along, that I was the villain in her story. I understood that now. She would tell her next husband, because there would certainly be a next husband, about her cruel mother-in-law and the fortune that should have been hers. I hoped that story gave her comfort. I hoped it kept her warm at night. But I was done carrying the weight of her narrative. I had my own story to tell now. You okay? Juniper asked, catching my expression. Better than okay. I picked up my own camera. Your turn to be the subject. She groaned dramatically but sat in the chair by the window, the January light turning her hair to copper and gold. I took 37 shots before I found the one her face half shadowed, her eyes holding that complicated mixture of youth and old soul wisdom that reminded me of myself at 15. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Craig arrived at 4 to help prep Sunday dinner. He did this every week now, showing up early to chop vegetables and learn recipes he'd never bothered learning from me before. His therapist's idea, he said. Something about rebuilding through service. I didn't ask for details. I simply handed him an apron and pointed toward the onions. The divorce finalized Friday, he said, mincing garlic with surprising competence. Signed the last papers. How do you feel? He considered the question seriously. Another thing his therapist had taught him, considering before answering. Relieved, sad, hopeful, a pause. Grateful that you still let me come to Sunday dinners. You're my son, Craig. That never changed. What changed was everything around that fact. The money was protected. The power dynamics had shifted. And Craig was learning, slowly and painfully, to become the man I'd always hoped he could be. Whether he'd finish that transformation, I couldn't know. But I could give him the space to try. Lorraine arrived at 5 with wine and a pie that Juniper had helped bake. We sat down to dinner at 6, the 4 of us around my small table, passing bread and telling stories and laughing at jokes that weren't particularly funny but felt hilarious anyway because we were together. Juniper insisted on documenting everything. She positioned her camera on a stack of books, set the timer, and rushed to squeeze into the frame beside me. The shutter clicked. Later, reviewing the image on her camera's screen, I felt something shift in my chest. 4 people at a table, candlelight, the remains of a meal shared. Nothing dramatic, nothing newsworthy, nothing that would ever hang in a museum or win an award. But Juniper caught the exact moment I reached for Lorraine's hand, the exact moment Craig looked at me with something like hope, the exact moment I stopped being a photographer and became simply a woman surrounded by people who loved her. "This one," I said, my voice thick. "This is the shot." 74 years behind the lens. And this was the only image I ever needed to keep. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 74 years believing that blood was thicker than betrayal. I trusted my son because he was my son. I welcomed my daughter-in-law because she was family. Don't make my mistake. Don't let love blind you to the warning signs right in front of your face. I nearly lost everything. My savings, my independence, my dignity, because I couldn't imagine my own child would hurt me. This family story taught me something I wish I had learned decades ago. Protect yourself first. You can love your children with your whole heart and still keep your eyes wide open. This drama story showed me that trust must be earned, even by those who share your blood. Some people call my life story a revenge story, but I see it differently. I didn't seek revenge. I sought justice. I sought peace. And I believe God put me through this trial so I could share it with you today. If my true story can help even one mother, one father, one grandparent protect themselves, then every painful moment was worth it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts on this family story. If this drama story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss another true story like this one. Thank you for staying until the very end of my life story. Your presence here means more than you know. One final note, while this revenge story is inspired by real experiences, some details have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to specific individuals is purely coincidental. What matters most is the message, and I hope it stays with you.